Привit, Connor Klein here, and in this video I'm going to address some of the speculation as to whether Ukraine is going to now go and develop its own nuclear weapons, in particular as a reaction to Donald Trump being elected the 47th President of the United States and the potential that he will cut off all military aid to Ukraine sometime after he takes office in late January 2025. So I have a background in international relations, in strategic studies, and in the region of Russia, Ukraine, and Central Asia, Belarus. And if we look back at why Ukraine does not currently have nuclear weapons, then we have to go back to the early 1990s when Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia all became independent countries. Obviously, beforehand, they had been in the USSR, and the Soviet Union had a very large nuclear program, and some of those nuclear weapons ended up in the constituent republics that then became independent outside of Russia. So Ukraine was the other former Soviet socialist republic that had a significant number of nuclear weapons. So in 1994, the Budapest Memorandum was signed. Infamously, at this stage, it provided some security assurances, not security guarantees. There's actually an important difference in the legal jargon on that. And it was signed by Russia, the United Kingdom, the US, and Ukraine. If we take that part of the agreement, there were similar agreements for Kazakhstan and Belarus. And importantly, those signatories to the Budapest Memorandum pledged not to violate Ukrainian territorial sovereignty. Obviously, Russia's done that in 2014 when they invaded and annexed Crimea, invaded parts of the Donbass region in the east, and then in 2022 they had an extended invasion. They now claim that they've annexed 4 oblasts Ukraine plus Crimea, although they don't actually control all of that territory. So clearly Russia is in violation of the Budapest Memorandum, which was the legal mechanism by which Ukraine agreed to join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and become a non-nuclear state, give up its nuclear weapons that were on its territory, and importantly, lose the nuclear deterrent, because nuclear weapons are primarily effective as a deterrent to aggression from other countries. You have your nuclear weapons, and then you basically give an ultimatum if someone crosses the border or attacks us or invades our country or tries to annex a piece of territory, then we will respond with these nuclear weapons, and they're so devastating that basically they deter the other would-be aggressor from taking that step. Now, it is interesting in the context of the Russo-Ukrainian war that Russia obviously has a very large stockpile of nuclear weapons. How effective they would be is a matter of debate. Ukraine, in the context of this war, has actually now invaded Russia. It's a legal invasion since they were invaded themselves by Russia in 2014 and 2022. But they currently occupy a region of Russia in the Kursk Oblast. Not a very big region, but it is a significant amount of territory in the context of the war that is actually Russian that is occupied. And Russia having nuclear weapons in this case did not act as a deterrent, nor did Russia use their nuclear weapons once their territory had been invaded and occupied. So interesting to see that it is the first time that a country that actually has a nuclear deterrent, well, wasn't effective in this case. Nonetheless, Ukraine currently does not have nuclear weapons since they gave them up in the early 90s for security assurances. They were not security guarantees, and you may have noticed that the US and UK have not forced Russia to leave Ukraine and restore their territorial integrity since then. What Ukraine is looking for now is, well, first of all, they would like to push the Russians out of all illegally occupied Ukrainian de jure territory. That includes Crimea and the parts of eastern Ukraine currently under occupation. And failing that in the short to medium term, they would like to have some sort of guarantee that Russia cannot further invade the country, as they've been doing slowly over the last 2 years. So in order to achieve that, you have a few options. You could build up your conventional military, right? So non-nuclear means. That's what Ukraine has been asking the West to help it with in terms of providing military aid. The US has been doing that to a certain extent, along with other mainly European allies, but other allies across the globe. And they have been building up that Ukrainian conventional deterrence and military strength. Obviously, they're in a significant war of attrition with Russia at the moment, so that obviously gets worn down and then has to be replaced. Another possibility is to join a security umbrella like NATO, which has Article 5, and that would mean that the other allies are committed to coming to Ukraine's aid in the case where they're attacked. Obviously, they're already under invasion, so if there was to be a pause in the fighting, which is mooted as a possibility with Donald Trump taking over, he will try and create the conditions for a very quick peace deal or cessation of hostilities. Then Ukraine would seek a security guarantee like joining NATO. Now, the current plan, I reacted to it in a video a few days ago. What's mooted as the proposed plan does not include NATO membership for Ukraine for 20 years, so that would not be a deterrence. Would they be able to build up their conventional forces in the meantime to act as a deterrence from further Russian aggression? That's very debatable. So what Ukraine could look for is a nuclear deterrent in the meantime. And that is what has been quoted as being said by Vladimir Zelensky to Donald Trump, the president-elect, that if they're not allowed to join NATO, then they will go and look for nuclear weapons. And then presumably that would act as a nuclear deterrent from further Russian aggression. You could argue that then Ukraine could threaten Russia to deploy its nuclear weapons to force them out, although that is less likely. Normally, nuclear weapons act as a deterrent from aggression. They're not as useful once that aggression has taken place. Obviously, if they start firing nuclear weapons at Russian forces, there is a possibility that Russia would respond in kind. So then we get into a different series of wargaming scenarios about the probability of that. However, if we look at how long would it potentially take for Ukraine to develop nuclear weapons, it has been mooted they could develop some sort of bomb within months, which is quite interesting. It may take a few years to build up a significant nuclear deterrence. But if you think about the possibility that there may be a cessation of hostilities and probably a bad peace deal from Ukraine's point of view being forced upon it, it could be a very good negotiation tactic to say, hey, if you don't give us a good peace deal and organize, if Russia does not give Ukraine a good peace deal, then we're going to go, from Ukraine's point of view, they're going to go and get a nuclear deterrent to ensure that Russia, or to increase the likelihood Russia is not going to invade them further down the line in 5-10 years. So it is interesting to look at whether that would work in the future, whether it's realistic, or is it a negotiation tactic to try and force the new Trump administration to force them to consider giving Ukraine NATO membership as part of some sort of deal with the cessation of hostilities with Russia. Now, I don't think Russia is likely to agree to anything that guarantees long-term stability and security for Ukraine. That would be, it'd be against the whole reason they started the war, which is to destroy Ukraine as an independent entity from Russia. So if Ukraine gets either NATO membership, a nuclear deterrent, or the convention means to prevent further Russian aggression, then that would defeat what Russia is trying to seek in terms of having launched this war. It is a revanchist, imperialist state. It wants to take back control of Ukraine and crush its independence, either through military occupation or through political control. As Karl von Clausewitz said famously, the Prussian military philosopher, war is the continuation of politics by other means. Definitely very interesting. What do I think will happen? I think it is more, in the short term, a negotiation tactic. I think pushing to develop a nuclear weapon now, while Ukraine is still engaged in fighting and defending its territory from further Russian aggression, would be risky in terms of guaranteeing continued political, financial, and military support from its allies. They may get very scared about the idea of nuclear proliferation and Ukraine pushing it. But at the same time, I think if there is a very bad peace deal from the point of view of Ukraine on the table, and they've been pressured with the potential for the United States of cutting all military aid, they could use this as a strong negotiation tactic and say, well, okay, now we're going to go and get nuclear weapons unless you provide us with more security guarantee, a real security guarantee, and something that will dissuade Russia from invading in the future. As I said, I don't see why Russia would sign such an agreement unless they're actually on the verge of losing the war, which could be possible sometime next year. In fact, if they run out of money, men, and materiel. I went into that in another video a couple of days ago about how Russia is really under pressure in terms of voluntary manpower. Its financial means, its economy is under real pressure, and obviously that they are running out of their Soviet-era stocks because they're just blowing through all of their reserves. This past month or two has been the highest rate for Russian casualties in the war. They are really pushing strong because they believe that when Trump comes into power, well, we presume, or my interpretation is at least that they believe that when Trump comes into power, that he will try and freeze the lines of contact and create a DMZ. That is one that's in this proposal that I reacted to a few days ago. Therefore, it would be in Russia's interest to push as far as possible, even though they are weakening themselves as they do that. Anyways, I'll wrap it up there. There are some things to think about in terms of nuclear deterrence. Doesn't mean that if Ukraine gets a nuclear weapon that there's going to be a nuclear Armageddon. Russia already has nuclear weapons. Ukraine, as I said, in the context of war, actually legally crossed the Russian border and now occupies a small part of Russian territory. There is no nuclear response. So presumably, Ukraine getting nuclear weapons would also not mean that they're planning to use them. They're mainly a deterrence mechanism, and that is the main reason to try to acquire nuclear weapons. So with that said, I will say do pobачення and see you tomorrow in the next video.